Hello everyone and welcome to our 2023 International Women's Day webinar. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm Sarah Ingwersen. I'm a partner at Taylor Root and the SR Group based in snowy London. It's like a winter wonderland here today. For those who aren't familiar with the SR Group, we are a global specialist recruitment business made up of 4 brands. So Brewer Morris specialises in tax, treasury and senior finance recruitment. Carter Murray specialises in marketing and sales recruitment. Fraser Jones specialises in HR recruitment, and Taylor Root specialises in legal, risk, compliance and internal audit recruitment. Before we kick off, I would love to hear where you're all joining from. This is a global webinar. We've got over 600 registrations, which is amazing. So if you can please put in the chat function where you're currently based so that we can see how truly global this webinar is. So today we're going to be shining the spotlight on the corporate athlete and their lessons learned. In the 2020 EY report, Why Female Athletes Make Winning Entrepreneurs, a survey of senior female executives found that 94% of women in the C-suite played a sport. And 74% of senior female executives agreed that sports helped them accelerate their careers. So it's been well documented by a number of high-profile studies that women's achievements and participation in sport has a really positive knock-on effect in relation to their personal life, their professional life and their community. And it can also inspire younger generations, as we've seen from recent sporting successes. So with the resurgence of crowd and spectator support on the world sporting stage, particularly in relation to women's sports, we wanted to explore firsthand the correlation between being an athlete and success in the workplace. And I am privileged to be joined here today by 3 former professional athletes who will all share their experiences of transitioning their careers as professional sports people to the corporate world. So I'm delighted to introduce them one by one. Firstly, Jasmine Titmuss. Jasmine is a former international cricket player, having represented both England and Hong Kong, as well as coaching the Hong Kong Cricket Club. And she's now in executive recruitment for corporate functions APAC at JP Morgan and Chase in Hong Kong. Welcome, Jasmine. Next, we have Joanna Fargus, who is an Olympic swimmer and a 2-time Commonwealth Games gold medalist, having represented both Great Britain and Australia. Joanna has over 15 years experience in corporate communications and is now internal communications manager at PEXA in Melbourne. Welcome, Jo. And finally, we have Jonny Searle MBE, who is a former Olympic gold medalist rower and an in-house lawyer. He now works as an executive coach and has a role as Chief Operating Officer in a technology business. And Jonny is joining us from London. Welcome, Jonny. Welcome to you all. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
So if you have any questions throughout the webinar for any of our panelists, please put them into the Q&A function and we'll try to get to them at the end. So before we kick off, I'd love to have a brief overview from all of you. Obviously, I've introduced you, but if each of you could just give a brief background of your sporting experience and you move into the corporate world in a bit more detail. Jazz, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Sarah, and hi everyone. It's great to see so many people. A very brief background of my story. Started playing cricket at the age of 8, went through the England programme, so through the England Academy for a long time, and then into various squads with England. I moved up to Lancashire once I graduated. I went to uni at Loughborough, where we're all based. I went up to captain Lancashire for about 5 years, and that was just as all this exciting franchise women contracts is happening. So it's amazing to see that now. And then I took an opportunity to come to Hong Kong, which was coaching. So I was head coach at Hong Kong Cricket Club. And at that point, I did my 2-year contract, which brought me out here, qualified to play for Hong Kong, which I technically still do, but I broke my ankle, so that's in a hiatus at the moment. And yeah, I moved into corporate after my 2-year contract, was recruitment, agency recruitment, Credit Suisse, and now JP Morgan.
Great, thanks so much, Jazz. Welcome. Jo?
Hi, thanks so much, Sarah, and thank you to everyone I can see online. Yeah, so a brief background of my sport. So I've always been a swimmer from when before I could even remember. Traveled all over the world, lived in the UK, was brought up in Hong Kong, in Australia. I competed for Great Britain at the 2000 Olympics, kind of had an up and down career. riddled with a little bit of injury and illness. I then switched to Swim for Australia in 2006 at the Commonwealth Games, winning 2 gold medals. I retired from swimming in 2008 and moved back to Hong Kong, where I started my career in communications. And that's taken me to here. I moved back to Australia in 2020, and now I'm currently working at PEXA down in Melbourne.
Amazing. Thanks so much. Welcome, Jo. And finally, Jonny.
Yeah, my sporting career started long ago. I was always obsessed by sport when I was young. My mum was a PE teacher and my dad was into sport as well. So I guess sport was always a big part of my life. Wanted to be good at it. Wasn't particularly good at anything when I was young, and then found rowing when I was an early teenager, and then became obsessed by winning an Olympic gold medal. Teacher at my school won an Olympic gold medal. I saw him do that and was inspired to do that. And that really for another 15 years was an obsession, I suppose, really, or certainly a high commitment, we'll say. Rowed in the national team for 10 years, won an Olympic gold medal in that time, as Sarah mentioned. Also wanted a sort of working career in the corporate world, so qualified as a lawyer, overlapping with that. It was a bit more amateurish sport in those days. So I worked in private practice for about 10 years, and then with some help from Sarah, got a role as an in-house lawyer.
It was about 20 years ago, Jonny.
It was about, and then worked in-house for about 15 years. And then moved across to sort of coaching. Really enjoyed the people side of the role I'd done, and moved across to coaching and sort of learning and development. I've been doing that for about 7 or 8 years, and also have a role in a technology business now. And to sort of complete the sporting loop, still a little bit of rowing, but actually coaching now as well with the women's group at Twickenham Rowing Club. And have 2 grown-up sons, 19 and 23. So that's me.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for your introductions and for being part of this webinar today. So just to kick things off, Jazz, we'll go with you first. So having operated in a traditionally male-dominated sport of cricket, what were the main challenges that you faced as a female athlete?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, I started playing from such a young age, and then there was no real infrastructure for females to get into the game. So until I was around 15, it wasn't even that it was a male-dominated sport. I was playing in male teams. So I played boys and men's cricket all the way through to kind of mid-teens. And I think the first thing I remember back then was I was known as the girl at my club. Someone's grandma even knitted me a boot bag with the girl on it, which was quite funny at the time. And to be honest, it was generally said in jest, and my teams did stick up for me. They honestly did. But as I got slightly older and then subsequently better, it did start to become a more condescending phrase, maybe used in a bit more of a malicious manner by older teenage boys. But the thing I would really call out was the fact that I felt like there was a slightly lower expectation of me. So I would often get, don't worry, try your best. And now I reflect on it. I don't think I processed at the time. I thought they were just being nice, and my team, but I don't think I quite processed that, what they were saying was actually quite wrong, because they weren't saying it to each other as well. It was just to me. And I don't think there was, a real malicious way to that. I think it was just them also trying to protect me, but at the same time, probably being slightly derogatory. And I think now you touched on it slightly, the women's games doing an amazing job of breaking that stereotype down, that, it's maybe not as exciting or not as good to watch. But yeah, that's my call out, them probably trying to protect me, but it was maybe lowering the expectations of my performance.
And I think we're in a world now where both men and women will call out that sort of behaviour, which is really positive, and not just in the sporting world, but in the corporate world as well. So I think we've progressed a lot, haven't we, from you being the girl. I mean, you certainly were a trailblazer for overturning gender-based assumptions as the only female cricket player. I remember when we were doing our review call for this, and you said that for a very long time, there was no female cricket club at all. So you were playing with the boys for for most of your childhood. And it's been reported widely that gender equality in the workplace won't happen until we have gender equality in society and on the sporting arena. So how do you find that playing sport in a traditionally male-dominated environment has helped you transition to the corporate world?
Yeah, and it's a good question. There's probably so many examples that I could give, honestly, but I think probably the main thing that's helped me transition is around dealing with pressure. I think pressure means different things to different people, and you often put pressure on yourself, especially when you're doing something new. So sport and male-dominated sport taught me to deal with a variety of those pressures. So pressure that I put on myself to do well, pressure from other people, because I guess at that point I stood out like a sore thumb when I was playing in the boys circuit, and I felt like every performance for me was scrutinized. And then when you get to your international cricket and it's them, on TV, etc., then you are kind of being scrutinized when you're at that stage. So I felt like I had to perform, but also you've got the game pressure. So the big moments, the big tournaments, making decisions as a captain and a coach. And I think that's been a real lesson when I'm transitioning to corporate. I was coming into something brand new, so I've immediately put a pressure on myself. It was a huge learning curve, and when I transitioned, I was probably slightly older than a lot of other people at my level, so I felt pressure that I should know more than I did, and I had to quickly catch up and learn. So I think it was just reminding yourself that you can do it. You don't panic, you go back to basics, which is where the sport really helps. And you know that you will be fine and you'll learn, and you'll probably surprise yourself how quickly that happens. So.
Yeah, and they're great characteristics to take through from your sporting life into your corporate life. Jo, turning to you, you've actually studied this, haven't you? You completed a Master's of Communication, and your dissertation was on the effects of the transition out of elite sport on self-identity. Do you think that women have greater challenges transitioning from the professional world after a career in sports, both from your personal experience and from what you found with your academic research?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question, because when I was doing my research, there was really very little, if any, literature that talked about the difference between men and women, male and female athletes during transition. But my own research showed that almost 80% of former athletes, both male and female, struggle with their post-career transition due to a number of factors, whether it's a heavy loss of self-identity or a loss of group belonging. But in terms of whether women have greater challenges transitioning to the professional world, my gut says yes. And anecdotally, I have experienced being overlooked for men, but I'm by no means an authority on this. But I think if we just look at women more broadly, there's a reason we're all here today. There's a pay gap that we're 300 years away from closing. There's more opportunities being presented for men, particularly in STEM. So I think, of course, this is going to carry over to the female athlete when they transition into the corporate world. But generally speaking, we're talking about a group of people who have strong identity tied to group belonging. And then they lose that and they have to find new social structures and support networks. I also believe men and women make social bonds in very different ways. I think women generally rely upon strong foundational support around them. I think female athletes see their teammates as an extension of themselves or even their family. So you're looking at former athletes who have just lost their sense of self-defining support network at the point of retirement. And I think, in that case, there are definitely going to be significant struggles in then finding their place in the corporate world.
Thank you. And I think it's something that's probably overlooked and just taken for granted, that you've had success in the sporting world and you'll naturally have success, but you're basically starting from the bottom. All three of you have pretty much started again, haven't you? Later on in life, as you mentioned, you're not necessarily in lockstep with your peers and contemporaries who've been there for a lot longer. Jazz, back to you. When overcoming the challenges that you faced in cricket and then transitioning to the corporate world, how important did you find male allyship to be for you?
Yeah, really important. And like I mentioned, I don't think it's a negative that I went through those early years playing boys and men's cricket, because I made such a tight-knit group of male friends. who I'm still close to this day. And that did really keep me going with my sport, because when I was at school, I could only have played boys cricket. So I was the first girl to play in the school first team circuit. And there was this big hoo-ha about whether it should happen. And they really stuck up for me. And they were probably my best years of cricket. I was doing my England Academy and that at the time, coming up to 18. And there was a couple of specific moments I can really remember. And I know we spoke about this in the prep. They actually used me to a tactical advantage. And I don't mean that in a, wrong or a right way. From a sporting perspective, they would often hear a lot of things from arriving teams or people we're playing against. They would make me open the bowling, and they used to reference, no one wants to get out to a girl. They'd put me in as a close catcher, and they used to often reference that it's because girls can't catch, and they used to then use it on the field as a quite a clever reverse psychology. So I when I was looking back how to kind of answer this question, that was something that really stuck with me. But kind of back to the point of the male allyship, like they spoke up and they stuck up for me, and they showed that, I was up to their standard and I was playing for a reason. And I think that is so important in the workplace. I often use sport as a real good conversation opener, if it's with senior stakeholders, and it really does help in the workplace. And I think having those people that stick up for you and speak up for you is so important wherever you are in your career journey.
And I love the fact that you used that to your advantage in your cricket career, where you were effectively the secret weapon and underestimated. Don't underestimate a woman, especially not
exactly.
Jazz. So, Jonny, over to you. In your capacity as an executive coach on this topic, how important have you seen that male allyship is both to the sporting and the corporate world?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that it's helpful for men to understand that the experiences for women in the sporting and corporate world might be different to the experiences that men have. And even just hearing some of the commentary today, I'm listening now and thinking that's clearly different to my experience. I think also helpful for men to understand if a woman raises a concern that she thinks she's being treated in some way because she's a woman, to sort of try to engage with that, try to understand that, and then provide whatever support seems appropriate in that situation. That's probably the second one. I suppose, for all men to think, where might we have these biases? We make assumptions, make statements based on perhaps the way we've been brought up or things we've seen in the past. And for all of us to just be aware that can happen and try to address that. And then I guess the last one is the one perhaps both of you, Sarah and you talked about there, the speaking up. Men and women, if you see something that doesn't seem right, to speak up about it. And I don't think that's exclusive for men or for women, but collectively, if something's not right, we should do what we can to address that. So I suppose those are the things I see both within sport, within corporate world, and my work.
Yes, and that speaking up piece has evolved quite sharply even over the last few years, hasn't it? Where people are empowered. We shouldn't have to have been, but the whole Me Too movement has empowered both women and men to call out behaviours in every respect that they're not comfortable with, which I think is massively helpful. And also, Jonny, having known you for over 20 years and having worked with you as a lawyer and recruited lots of females for you, I know that you've been a great male ally to the female lawyers and colleagues that you've worked with and whose careers you've supported as well. So there's testament to that from a professional capacity, from my professional capacity. So a slight segue here. I'm just keen to hear how you all embrace exercise now that the pressure is off your sporting careers. So Jo, over to you first. Well-being and sport are such crucial elements to success in the corporate world, but do you find it difficult to enjoy success socially when you've been at the top of your game?
I'd say yes and no. I didn't really leave swimming on the greatest of terms. As I said earlier, I was riddled with injury and illness. And, you know, I retired from swimming 15 years ago and 15 plus kilograms ago. So, I mean, if you asked me to go and swim for pleasure now, I would probably say no. But I did find that after such a long career in a solitary sport, I really wanted to do something that was more team oriented, where I could have fun, I could be surrounded by friends. So I actually, when I moved back to Hong Kong in 2008, I took up hockey. And I was terrible at it, but I really enjoyed it. I loved being in that team environment. I loved playing a game, being competitive, but there was, you know, the pressure was off and I could just enjoy it. And now I've actually joined a strength training gym in Melbourne, which is kind of ironic because that was my least favorite part of swimming, was lifting weights. But it's nice to kind of finally be in a place where I want to be strong again and I'm enjoying it. Yeah, and there's no pressure.
Yeah, brilliant. And Jonny, what about you? What's your experience been? Because you're still actively involved in rowing, aren't you? You still compete, you coach rowing, women's rowing teams at Twickenham. Have you had a different experience to Jo?
Maybe I recognise some of that, certainly to start with. I think you talked earlier about just a sense of loss of identity. I think that was earlier, but you know, when I was obsessed with rowing for 15 years, it was really all that mattered, and being an Olympian was part of who I was, and letting that go has been both useful and hard. You know, I was so obsessed, you know, I think I maybe said, you know, I used to say, what was I saying? I only row for fun, but it's no fun if you don't win, which is, you know, quite useful when you're trying to be the best in the world at something. But if you're going to go on to do sport after that, as you get older and less fit, not so useful. So I think I've probably transitioned and taken other things from sport. And sport is so much for people. You know, for me, it can be learning. It can be about being fit. I tell people rowing is all about, it's mindfulness. It's everything to do with mindfulness and well-being. You're outside, you're doing exercise, you're with people, you're with friends. Beautiful feeling as the boat moves. There's a rhythm to the way the boat moves. So I guess I try to take that from the sport now. So I still do some rowing. That's fine right up to the point where someone comes alongside, and then it's about the winning again. But up to that point, I can enjoy the other aspects. And then also, as I say, I do some coaching and yeah.
I was just going to say, you've still got that competitive streak, don't you?
It's either on or off. So if I keep it switched off, it's fine. But if a boat comes alongside, then it goes on. Yeah, and I still do a bit of coaching, and that for me is a real joy to bring, you know, primarily enjoyment. I try to, perhaps the opposite to what I was, start with, let's enjoy rowing, and then let's try to go fast on top of that. So yeah, that's my experience, I suppose, now.
Yeah, brilliant. So back to the corporate world, Jo, as a professional athlete, we talked a lot, and you've obviously discussed this on the briefing calls, and it's come up in your research, that you're in a constant feedback loop, aren't you, based on your day-to-day performance, where everything is critiqued. Do you think this has influenced how you receive and provide feedback in the corporate environment?
Yeah, I think so. And I think this was one of the more interesting pieces that came out of my research. You know, as an athlete, every day, every minute that you're exercising or in the pool or in the gym, you're given feedback about identifying areas of weakness, how they can be improved. And it's all because your coaches want the best out of you, and those micro changes on a constant basis help you improve. And I think this, in a way, kind of makes you resilient and crave that feedback. It makes you resilient to feedback and critique, and then you crave it. So in post-retirement, I've really noticed that there doesn't appear to be that same kind of culture, particularly, you know, in the corporate world. And it's really hard to even get constructive criticism when it's warranted. But I think as an athlete, you take that feedback for granted. You know, it's like, oh, coach, just like leave me alone. But I found now that the best managers I've had understand that feedback is really important to me for personal development, you know, beyond those kind of once yearly performance reviews. And I think that it's really useful for managers to know that constructive feedback is critical when managing former athletes, you know, not just a well done, but actual feedback that helps with performance improvement.
Yeah, great, thank you. And Jazz, what about you? Jo mentioned that resilience is you know, part of your kind of DNA, or part of the makeup as an athlete. Have you experienced the same? You know, how do you feel that being in that constant feedback loop has impacted you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think resilience does spread to all over areas as well. So when I spoke at the beginning about dealing with pressure, you have to be resilient to be able to do that. And like Jo mentioned, with the feedback piece, you have to constantly be resilient if you're getting feedback. And it all intertwines. And I think that really does build you into someone who strives to be the best they can be. And that's very much the trademark of an athlete. But the feedback's been really important for me. Obviously, learned over the years that I'm extremely competitive, no surprises. And I do want to learn and develop. And I actively ask for constructive feedback now, and I've noticed it. But many people don't. And I think, especially in Hong Kong, it's a bit more of a cultural thing as well, with not wanting to lose face. And I do see people struggle with it in the workplace. And I used to hate it. I used to think that any sort of feedback immediately meant I wasn't doing well, that I used to get very defensive. And the moment for me was when I flipped to being a coach, and when I was a head coach, that it's all there and all designed to help you and help you improve. It's exactly what Joe said. And, that completely changed my thought process. And I think the reason I do ask for it now is because I probably do miss it. I probably do crave it a little bit. And in the workplace, you can't crave, positive feedback all the time. So I have actually learned to quite enjoy constructive feedback, but it's there for a reason, and it's there to make you better. So
yeah. And it's all relative, isn't it? Because in the sporting world, you're striving for perfection, whether that's a World Cup win or Olympic or Commonwealth Games gold. But in the corporate world, not everyone wants to be the best. Some people are just comfortable doing their job. So it's just a matter of, I guess, being mindful, isn't it? That not everybody will be comfortable giving that feedback to the same degree that you want to receive it. But I think it's a really interesting takeaway for anybody who might be managing somebody that's come from this career. What about you, Jonny? What do you see? You've been in leadership roles. Do you think that giving and receiving feedback constantly as a role has affected the way that you deliver feedback as a coach?
Yeah, I think that just as Joe and Jazz said, feedback is such a vital part of sport, and frankly, it's all of sport. There's a result, there's a processing of that, and then there's a change in action, change in behaviour as a result. So the result itself is a form of feedback almost every day, or certainly on a regular basis. There's an actual tangible result that allows you to learn and adapt, and then natural that coaches, colleagues, teammates, we talk about how things are going. How can we learn? How can we go faster? Because everyone is trying to be probably the best we can be, or as fast as we can go. So it doesn't seem in any way negative, really, because we're just striving to go faster and be better. So I think my observation is generally in a sporting environment, the feedback is quite direct because it's not personal. It's just, let's go faster, let's do this better, let's win more matches, let's do the skills better. So the sporting world is simple in some ways, and perhaps suits people who both give and receive feedback in a very direct way. I think my observation about the working environment is because relationships and getting on with people are a large element of the working environment, that sometimes that direct feedback, if it's given to someone who isn't so comfortable and used to doing it and doesn't welcome it, and as you say, not everyone wants to improve every day what they do, and that's fine. We're all different. And if you give it to someone who doesn't want that, then it can affect the relationship, which is part of working life. And again, I know I've asked for feedback I remember asking a CEO in a business for some feedback. He said, I'll tell you when you're doing anything wrong. And it felt like, I was trying to, just have like a normal type, what's going well, what can I learn? And it just felt like I don't know whether he was worried that I was going to be upset or something. I don't know. I think that's sometimes why you don't get it, because people have got a concern that if I tell you this, you might be upset, as opposed to, if I'm not performing, I'd rather know, then I can do something about it. I think people sometimes think, it's really kind not to, I don't think it's kind to allow someone to be probably underperforming or not at their best and not give them that information. But maybe the final thing I'd say, is a sort of soundbite type, I think you want to say, feedback's a gift. I'm happy to give the gift, receive the gift, but it probably in the working environment, it needs to be wrapped up, in a nice way. And that's probably the difference perhaps between sport and a working environment. I think you still give the feedback, but be mindful of the recipient, perhaps more than you might in a sports environment.
And it's so much about the delivery, isn't it? And perhaps phrasing it that in the spirit of wanting to make you the best person that you can be, or the best professional that you can be. This is my observation, but you're absolutely right. If somebody's not receptive to that, then it's quite difficult for it to land the way you intend it to land. And I'm quite interested to hear, Jonny, your observations from rowing, from coaching men and women as well, how you feel that conflict is dealt with by women as opposed to men, from what you've seen.
I had some initial thoughts about this. I think when I reflected on it, I think in the corporate world, I don't see any difference here, really. I think, you know, if there's disagreement to be had or issues to raise, I think my observation is men and women are quite capable of doing that. They do it in a relatively managed way, and maybe that's what takes it away from the sports environment. Maybe it's back to that more directing. Perhaps people are more reasonable, if that's the right expression, in the work environment. So I don't see a difference, I think, between men and women in the corporate environment. I think in a sporting environment, my sense is I've seen slightly more arguments, direct disagreements in the men's crews that I've been involved in than the women, but I'm not 100% sure about that. And actually, when I did think about it, I thought it's possible that I've seen a lot of arguments and direct disagreements in men's rowing boats because I was involved in starting those discussions.
It's very honest of you.
Yeah, it's always tricky. You see the world through your own eyes, and
yeah.
You know, yeah.
Thank you. Jazz, back to you. We've talked a lot about resilience and, you know, and teamworkmanship and you know, leadership. But what other characteristics do you think that female athletes possess that translate well to the corporate environment?
Yeah, I think definitely is the strong work ethic. I think no matter what level you are, you know, whether you're just transitioning into corporate or you've been on that journey now, I think putting your time into something will always give you the success. Like, people achieve things at different paces, but it's about having that ethic to want to do something. And I think that does come quite inherently for sports people who do transition in. The second for me is the team element. So I think whether you've been an individual you know, sports person, or you've been in teams, you always have teams around you have to work with. And I think the real beauty is that the athletes bring is balancing your competitiveness, because it's completely different when you go into corporate. So it's a different kind of competitiveness with bringing your team on that journey with you. And I think that is, for me, the key to being a good leader. I think, you know, there's a million different things in corporate. You want to get promoted, you want to do X, Y, Z, but actually it is you're still working in a team. And I think people often forget in the workplace that, you know, you are actually, it's very similar. You're working towards the same goal. Really, it is, you know, very similar to actually trying to achieve something as a sports team, and you've got that common goal. So I think it's good to just be reminded that, you know, you are in a team, and you should bring those people with you on those successes. And then the third one for me is communication. So I've learned so much from captaining and coaching, and I think the art of being able to be diplomatic yet firm is key, and it's been a struggle for me. But yeah, and actually probably corporates taught me that on the flip side, which has been nice.
And you obviously talked about teamwork. Teamwork is so important to you, and you've carried that through since leaving cricket. You're running off to a hockey match straight after this, aren't you? And I know your hockey team has
an hour and a half.
We'll try and wrap up in time. But I know that sense of community that was mentioned earlier, it has been really important for you as you've transitioned out of the cricket sporting world. Jazz has mentioned that being an effective team player is something that she's taken from playing sport. Would you agree on that? And are there any characteristics apart from that you think female athletes possess that help translate well into the corporate world?
Yeah, I think the team player element is definitely key. I think, you know, aside from some of the more obvious characteristics from athletes, you know, self-motivation, passion, drive. I think a really big and perhaps unexpected characteristic that former athletes possess is empathy. I think, you know, we've all kind of been in the trenches per se. You know, we've struggled through blood, sweat, and tears with our teammates. We've not always come out on top, you know, rarely come out on top in some cases. And I think that gives female athletes additional sensitivity into the struggles that others are going through, particularly in the workplace. I think, you know, empathy is a skill that you can train, but I think as female athletes, it becomes almost inherent.
Thank you. We are almost out of time for the formal part of the proceedings, but I've got one final question that I want to put to all three of you. And this is obviously the crux of this webinar and what everybody's joined up to hear. So we'll go through one by one. Jonny first. What is the main lesson that you have learned from the sporting world that's contributed to your success in corporate life?
Yeah, so I suppose I thought, like a good lawyer, I should try and define success to start with. And I suppose broadly, you know, for me, success, I've pretty much enjoyed my entire working life. I feel quite privileged that, you know, meet people sometimes who don't enjoy their job, and pretty much every day I've enjoyed what I've done, and at different times, different things have mattered to me, and I've enjoyed different things at different stages. I suppose the main lesson I got is around, you know, knowing what's important to you, knowing what matters to you. Maybe don't be swayed by what other people's goals are, what other people's beliefs about your ability, or what they think you should be doing or are capable of doing. Try to stick to what really matters to you. So, you know, I think if you follow what matters to you and try to stay true to that, then you're likely to be happy doing whatever it is you're doing at a particular time of life. So for me, I suppose that would be the success I have. I followed rowing to it, you know, largely because it really mattered to me at the time, and I followed other things in my life that were priorities. So that would be the lesson, I suppose, about what my idea of success is.
I think that's really important, and that was answered like a true lawyer. Thank you very much, Jonny. That's great. Jazz, what about you?
Yeah, mine's a slightly different angle, and I think for me it's about two things. So asking questions and listening to what the response is. Like a very simple kind of success. I think you learn so much from the people around you, whether it's teammates, whether it's tactics, whether it's learning about someone's culture, whether it's that team building element, or whether it's actually learning about something you need to learn at work, or whatever it is. And I think it's just so important that you take the time to ask. And nothing's ever a silly question, but even more important to listen to what someone says. I think that's where I've found the most learns from sport and corporate, and would always encourage that as my kind of success answer, I think.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jazz. What about you, Jo? What's been your main lesson learned?
I think the biggest lesson I've learned is to focus on the process and not the outcome. You know, as an athlete, you set goals. For example, is it Olympic gold medal? And every day you're working towards that goal by making incremental changes and progress. But if you focus only on the goal without the process, you're going to miss out on all the crucial steps to get there. The challenge is when you try to translate that into the corporate world. I think it's really hard to quantify professional goals. You know, as an athlete, you have very clear goals. Is it Olympic gold medalist? Is it World Championship, World Cup, etc.? But in the corporate world, you know, there aren't really a gold medal for the best lawyer in the world, or the best internal communications manager in the world. So I think professional success is a little bit harder to measure. But ultimately, it's all about being able to set those clear professional goals. And then if you follow the process, it will take care of itself.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So we've got time for a few questions from our audience. I'm just going to go to the Q&A function now. We have one here, which I think, Jonny, I might put this to you actually, with your experience as a corporate coach. How do you build successful teams in the corporate environment when often opposing interest and politics?
Yeah. I mean, I think that goes, it's interesting to the point So you just made about, I was thinking about this controllables thing, which probably most athletes know about, and people have read Stephen Covey. You know, there's what you can control, what you can't control, and what you can influence. And I think the challenge in the building teams is that ability to influence others and to try to bring others with you to the goal, and that people may have slightly differing motivations. So I think probably the answer to that is to try to understand what's motivating people, what's important to people, and then try to tap into that, go another level deeper. So if the goal is launch a product, well, for someone it might be about, I don't know, making some money from the product. For someone it might be the creativity. For someone it might be the teamwork, the collaboration, working with others. And that's probably the way to go another level deeper into what's driving you, what's important to you, and perhaps by getting to that level of I suppose you talked about empathy earlier. It's whatever it's understanding people and understanding what's motivating them. So I think that would be a suggestion around that. How to really bring teams together is understand what goes on for the people, which I can actually think about it. Asking questions, listening. Yeah. For me, certainly, I don't have great natural empathy. So for me, I have to ask people, what's important to you about life. Try to understand people. That I think helps to bring the team.
And realise that everyone's got different motivations as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's the thing from coaching. You can believe how different people's motivations are, even if they're in the same type of role. Their life experiences, what's going on for that particular time. And people tend to look out through their own eyes and try to use the same motivation that drives them. So yeah, I think that would be the suggestion.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. We've got a really interesting question from Amber. Thank you, Amber, for this. This is kind of spinning the topic on its head, but is there something that you've learned from your corporate life that may have helped in your sporting career? Jazz, I'm going to go to you first, then I'll come to you, Jo.
That's such a good question.
Yeah.
I would probably say, it's quite a funny answer, but I would probably say to think before you speak. Sounds like an interesting one, but I think when obviously at work, if something happens or I'm frustrated, I'm not just going to fly off. And not that I'm typically a person but when it's, a massive sporting moment and something doesn't quite go right, I probably have lost my cool on a couple of occasions, not particularly at a person, but it ends up being, at a certain situation, and a person may think it's about them. So I think that was a really good lesson of just going, okay, it's fine. Why has that frustrated me? I'll, take an evening, think about it, might not even be angry about it tomorrow, or I'll just speak to that person or deal with that situation. Whereas I think in sport, sometimes I probably didn't do that, and I just was emotional and let that out. So that's been a really good thing to absorb and take into my own life. Like I got angry in a hockey match not long ago. I think I took my helmet off and kicked it into the goal for some reason, and it was club hockey. So I'm just competitive, but it's been a great learn. I think that's the one thing that I would have taken back into my sporting career and reflected on. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Jo, what about you? Have you ever taken off your goggles and thrown them in the pool?
Oh, no, I was just going to say that we've all been there with hockey. I've been known to throw a hockey stick once in a while at a much lower level of hockey. But no, I think this is a really interesting question. I think if I could take something from my corporate life, would be more like a sponge and absorb information from the people around me who know more than me. And I do that now. And I feel like in the corporate world, no question is a stupid question. These people are excellent at what they do. As an athlete, sometimes you can have the tendency to be a little stubborn and think you know best. But I think you've just got to trust that there are lots of people that know better things than you. So yeah, I would have just tried to take more of that on board.
Great. Thank you, Amber, for that question. That was a really interesting spin and take on our topic. Another question from Emma, who is based in Amsterdam. Hi, Emma. Emma has said, I think that sport is very useful for learning to deal with setbacks well. It would be good to hear the panelists' perspective. And she also said, great session. Thanks, Emma, for the feedback. Jonny, what do you think about that? What's your take on your resilience to deal with setbacks in the professional context, having had setbacks in your sporting career?
Yeah, I think again, there's probably a short-term one and a long-term. So day-to-day setbacks. This is part of sporting life. Happens every day. Something doesn't quite work out. You make a mistake. You're not quite fit. You're a bit injured. Someone else does something. The wind's not right. The boat. Something happens to the boat. I mean, there's all kinds of bits and pieces that happen all the time. Injuries, I suppose, is a big one. Actually, you get knocked back, and it's really can be out of your control to a large degree what you're able to do, and then just finding a way forwards. That's one. Actually, if you get injured, it'd be very easy. I had an injury in '92 before the Olympics, and a rib injury. I couldn't row for 5 or 6 weeks, and I just did sort of visualization of what the boat felt like, how the race would be, and then ran harder than I'd ever run before. I just shifted the training to maintain fitness and sort of found a way. And I think that's perhaps, again, because it's just such a clear goal that you're normally working towards, finding a way to keep moving towards it is probably something that applies to most things in life. I suppose the only thing I would say about that is the sort of slight shadow of that is when the goal is this, sometimes it is better to just have a rest. And I think that's the one thing. Sometimes the drive that there must be a way to do something can be I have on occasion got tired and run down. I keep picking myself up and keep going forwards, and that's the shadow, I suppose, of having that drive and determination to recover and come back from the setback.
I do feel that translates well to the corporate environment where it's not as tangible in terms of the goals that you're trying to achieve.
Sorry, I missed the start of the
Sorry.
question. Sorry. Yeah.
Do you feel that translates well to the corporate environment where the goals might not be as tangible as Olympic gold medal on the sporting arena?
I think, maybe this sounds a bit negative. I think most goals in business are more granular. They're more day-to-day type process ones. So there often aren't these binary moments that you get in sport. I still am slightly annoyed about not getting a gold medal in '96, but only getting a bronze. And that I sort of can't come back from. But it's there, and so sometimes there's these things. That's 4 years of my life in that moment. That's how I look at it, and so that's quite a big moment. I guess in most business worlds, you don't have quite the same moments of it was real or sort of all or nothing type stuff. So I suppose there's a bit of me feels, well, if I've had that level of commitment, effort, whatever, disappointment, then I can put some work problems in a context that it's rare that we've got something that has taken so much effort and goes wrong in a way that not goes wrong. It doesn't work out as you'd hope. You can't come back from and do again.
Yeah, and you can put it in perspective in that regard. Yeah, great. Another question here. What tips can you offer to pick yourself up quickly and move on when you failed at a goal? And I guess this is kind of flowing on from the previous question. Jazz, any thoughts on that? How to pick yourself up when you've got a disappointment?
Yeah, I think how to kind of pick yourself up quickly and move on. I think it depends what the goal was, whether you reflect on it and try and achieve it again, or if it's something that you completely move on from. So one thing that we always got taught was to kind of visualize screwing something up and throwing it over your shoulder to just erase it. And it actually really helped me because it stopped me overthinking it in that moment, and then I would come back to it and work out. And I think that's the difference between corporate and sport, because if you haven't achieved something in sport, it's probably something technical or tactical that you can really break down and find out why. Whereas I feel like in the workplace, if it was like a deal that didn't go through, or it's just slightly different, it's probably a little bit harder to break down as to why you haven't achieved it. So I think it's all about just being able to reflect and break it down in some sort of way. And is there a way you can do it better? And maybe not thinking of it as a failure, think it as it's something that can't be done in that way. So let's find another way to do it. So maybe finding it as a solution rather than I've failed at something. But it is hard, and I still haven't mastered it. Like, I still get really frustrated if something hasn't quite gone the way I wanted it to. But yeah, I think it's the mindset of more of a solution mindset than a failure mindset that really helps. And you should try screwing something up and throwing it out and coming back to it. It really helped me, for sure.
Right.
It seems really like a really small thing, but it's just like mentally putting it in the bin.
Just dismissing it, getting rid of it. Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you, Teresa, for that question. Another question from Rosie, actually, who works at the SR Group. Thank you, Rosie. And this is actually one for you, Jo, because I think you've studied this a little bit, so might have some great insights into this. Do you think that there's more pressure on today's generation of sports women and men, for example, with social media and their public personas? And do you think that helps or hinders their transition to the corporate world?
I think there is so much pressure on sports people, the younger generation in general, when you're talking about social media. I'm very glad that it wasn't really around when I was a swimmer. I think that would have added such a complex dimension to an already very stressful career. But I think that it can be a hindrance, but I think it can be a real help. I think personal branding is so important these days. And I think if you can harness the power of social media to enhance your personal brand, that's going to carry you through into the corporate world. I think there are so many tools out there now that can teach you how to do social media correctly. And I think that the mistakes that we made in the early days probably won't be duplicated these days.
Let's hope. Another great question, actually, that I'd love to hear from all of you in just a kind of soundbite. Does visualizing success to win help? Jonny?
Yeah. Well, I think certainly in a sports environment, I watch the video occasionally of me crossing the line in '92, and I've got a sort of celebration when I'm doing this. And I did that, 3 times a week, 4 times a week when I was training, wherever I was training. When I was at university, I'd be training down the river doing that. When I was a kid at school, wherever I was, I would finish a piece sometime and visualize what it would feel like to cross the line, knowing I won the Olympics. So that was a very specific moment that I was really tied to. I know we talked about the process earlier, but I was very tied to the goal as well. But I think just visualizing how the boat feels, again, different sports will have their own visualization, but the rhythm, the way the boat moves, moving in time, for me, that was a thing I love, and it was probably one of my strengths. So I just love to visualize bits of work we'd done, bits of training we'd done where the boat was flying. And I can tell you now, Varese and training camp we did in Varese, it was a piece in Lake Barrington in Tasmania and one at Molesey. So even now I visualize those 3 sessions. I'm on the rowing machine or rowing as just a beautiful moment of rowing. So that's quite a narrow focus. I think in the workplace, again, harder perhaps, because how do you visualize? There's often other people involved in these things. So you're going to have to try to visualize how will someone else react, and that perhaps is a little harder to do, because there's unknowns in that image making.
Yeah, thanks, Jonny. And Jo, you were nodding. Did you find visualization a helpful tactic when you were swimming?
Yeah, I did. I think I won the gold medal hundreds of times in my head. But I think
before you won it, or before you won it?
Oh no, before I won it. But I mean, I won the Olympic gold medal in my head. I never won that in real life. But I think for me, a lot of the visualization was I'll keep coming back to the process. It was about exactly what Jonny was saying. How are you feeling? How does the water feel? How we got to a point where I could visualize in my head the exact time that I wanted to race, and I could count to 2 minutes and 6 seconds in my head. Just visualization. So I think probably less focusing on the actual goal at the end and more about how you're going to get there.
Great, thank you, Jazz. What about you?
Yeah, honestly, just echo the same. Like, I'm a big visualizer. I'll give you the funniest example. I'd just been on a ski trip and I never skied before in my life. And I went with a group of skiers, and before it, I was like, of course I can ski. I'll watch some YouTube videos. I'll visualize myself skiing. I'll be fine. And honestly, I think in another life I've been skiing because I was quite good. But it was, I don't know, I just kept thinking of myself as a skier in my head. And I don't know, it was weird. It was quite natural, but it was also that competitive streak, because day 2, whether it's appropriate for the call or not, we're going to an après ski place, and you could only get there if you could ski down a blue. And I was like, well, I'm definitely going to après. So I threw myself down a blue on day 2 and I was fine. But no, I think I spent probably 2 months visualizing myself skiing. It was weird. But no, I do it with many things. I visualize, I go through conversations in my head for work, like visualize what the scenario is, probably how I want it to go. But yeah, I've always done it with my sport as well. I think it probably depends if you're that type of learner and that type of person, but yeah, for sure helps me.
A really interesting question and great answer from all of you, but Jazz, interesting to hear that tactic has carried through not just to your professional environment, but also in your personal life as well. We are almost out of time. We've got 4 minutes to go. So I just wanted to extend a massive thank you to our 3 amazing panelists, Jazz, Jo and Jonny. That was an extremely insightful, fascinating, interesting session. And we've covered so much ground in terms of what you've all talked about, the importance of teamwork, communication, strong work ethic, confidence, determination, passion, leadership, resilience. I mean, there's so many qualities that you've talked about, and how these attributes can translate well into behaviours that can propel corporate success. So thank you all. And I'm sure that all of your individual journeys have been of great interest to everybody listening. You've given us some useful sound bites in terms of lessons learned from 3 very inspirational, personable corporate athletes. So thank you all. I also want to thank Gabby Kitney, who is the head of marketing for North America, based in our New York office, for her incredible work behind the scenes, pulling this whole webinar together and liaising with all the panelists so effortlessly. So thank you very much, Gabby, who also woke up at about 4 a.m, I think, New York time to log on today. And a huge thank you to all of you for joining, for registering, for taking part in International Women's Day. I know there's a lot more questions there. We're not going to have time to get to them all, but we will try and answer them over the next couple of weeks. So do keep a lookout on our website. And also on the SR Group's LinkedIn page. We will, in answer to a couple of your questions, be recording, or have been recording, and we'll be posting the recording in the next couple of days once we've tidied it up a little bit. But please do connect with us on LinkedIn, and happy International Women's Day, everybody. Thank you.